Welcome back to Find Your Alpha. Today we've got another terrific video, but I want to warn everyone this is a long video. So today I'm going to be doing part one, and tomorrow you need to come back and listen to part two. The reason why this video is so long is that this OP just found out recently that an affair his wife had long ago. He found out some additional information about that affair, which just let me say she didn't give him the full story. We'll leave it at that. And the title, we're going to jump right in here so that we don't waste any time. My wife lied about the affair I forgave her for 13 years ago. So let's get into the story now. The original post, as you can see, just recently, Saturday, September 3rd, which was Labor Day weekend. The setup is going to be long, but I need to tell my full story as I need advice. My wife and I are both 38 years old. We got married 18 years ago and have two wonderful kids, a boy 17 and a girl 16. So that means they got married at age 20. Which, as we've talked about many times, too young, way too young. We met through mutual friends when we were 19 and immediately fell in love. Being young and with little money, life was sometimes challenging, but our love for each other got us through. At the time, I was working a job in customer service for an ISP, and that stands for Internet Service Provider. And my wife was working at an office as an assistant/coordinator. We had a nice apartment and two nice cars. A few months after we got married, my wife got pregnant with our son. At about the same time, I got promoted to supervisor of my department, which came with a healthy raise, so we decided that my wife would transition to being a stay-at-home mom when our son was born. A year after our son was born, my wife gave birth to our daughter. 3 years later, we bought a nice 4-bedroom starter house in a family-oriented neighborhood. We spent a lot of time with our kids, but always made time to keep our love life active and passionate. I could not have been happier or more proud of my family and my career accomplishments. We seemed to be living the American dream. Life was good. Until, and let's find out what happens here. He says, life implosion 1. My world imploded when I got a voicemail message at the office one day from a woman, Mrs. Jones, and he says here fake. Okay, so it's a fake name, Mrs. Jones. In the message, she explained that she was the wife of a former coworker of my wife, and she had something important to discuss with me about them. I didn't know who this coworker was, so I had no idea what she was calling about. I called her, and she explained that she was going to give me news that I wasn't going to like. We've heard this before in these stories. She then stated that my wife was having an affair with her husband. Ugh. Mrs. Jones said she just discovered the affair this week and her husband confessed. She said her husband claimed they had been having inappropriate conversations and meetups for more than a year, but swore it only turned physical within the last week. And I underlined that because that's going to come back later. She found out by seeing an email between her husband and my wife graphically discussing get-togethers at their house while she was at work. Now, how dumb could they be sending emails? Now, I'm sure they probably kept it on the down low, but man, that's just sloppy. I was obviously sickened by the news and couldn't and didn't believe it at first. I went home, and when I opened the door, my wife was in front of me crying and begging for forgiveness. She was already in full survival mode. Obviously, her lover had notified her that their secret affair was discovered and that his wife had talked to me. Prior to me coming home, my wife had taken our kids to my parents' house to stay, saying that she was going to surprise me with an impromptu date night. Man, that's one hell of a date night. Wow. So she's there just begging and pleading and crying. Oh, I'm so sorry. She's really sorry that she got caught. Let's face it. We both cried uncontrollably. Well, right there was a mistake on his part. He shouldn't have cried in front of her, but I can understand it. This guy was only what at this point, like 25 years old. He was working his ass off, providing for his family. He built a beautiful family. He was thinking life was good. He was making his family proud of him, his in-laws proud of him. And then what does his wife do? She goes out and just pisses all over him and totally disrespects him. Totally disgusting. He says they cried uncontrollably for what seemed like hours. I have never felt so bad in my life. I was both physically and mentally sick, and she was too. We stayed up all night talking, crying, with me doing a lot of shouting and asking why. And how could you do this to me and our kids? See, that's the thing too. It's not only cheating on him, but it's also cheating on those two little kids. Throughout this time, my wife just kept begging me to not leave her, professing how much she loved me and how sorry she was. She confirmed the affair details her paramour had given. Now, see, I underlined that as well because she's confirming what her lover said, and said if I gave her another chance, she would prove to me that she will be the best wife in the world. Now, what does that even mean? And that she would make sure I never regretted staying with her. Of course, she's going to say anything. I kept telling her that I will never trust or touch her again and that I wanted a divorce. Now, if it were me and I was in this situation, that's the course of action I would have followed. But you're going to find out he's not going to follow that course of action. Every time I said this, she became hysterical. And we've heard that in all these stories too. Once, the man says, hey, I can't live with you anymore. We got a divorce. They all seem to go hysterical. In the end, I told her that I would stay in the marriage if she would sign a post-nuptial agreement. I read a story some time ago about a man who put such an agreement in place with his cheating wife. I always remembered that story as I felt sorry for the man and his kids, and now this man was me. The agreement would outline the affair and would state that in the event of a future divorce by either party, so not future cheating, he's saying a future divorce by either party following this affair, she, being the wife, would not receive alimony and would only be entitled to 25% of any jointly held assets versus the standard 50%. We would also each retain 50-50 custody of our kids, and the kids' primary home would be with me. I told her it's the post-nup or we could divorce now, and she would be entitled to alimony, 50% of the assets, and would likely get primary custody of the kids. So let's see what she decides to do. She opted for the post-nup, but asked if we could omit the affair from the agreement as she was ashamed. It's like, no, we're not admitting that because it's the whole reason why we have this agreement in place in the first place. And he says that right here. I emphatically said no, as without the affair, there would be no basis for the agreement. We did, however, agree that we would keep the affair between ourselves. He says here, a huge mistake I'll explain later. Yeah, that is a major mistake. Once an affair happens and you find out about it, you need to broadcast it to the world. Don't shoulder all of that in your, inside of you, in your mind, because that's just going to eat at you, eat away at you. And you're not going to have any outlets to be able to get some of that frustration out. He says, and try to put this behind us. However, I told her I didn't see us ever being more than roommates raising children. She agreed to keeping the secret. See, it was him who wanted to keep the secret. So she agreed to it. She cried loudly and said she would spend the rest of her life, if needed, to win back my trust and my unconditional love. Well, I can tell you that trust is never going to fully come back once cheating has occurred. And also, the unconditional love is never going to fully come back once cheating has occurred. So forget that. The following week, I met with a divorce attorney, and within 2 weeks, we had a signed and filed postnuptial agreement in place. So they must file these kind of agreements somewhere, I'm assuming at the courthouse. I then required that we both have STD panels completed and had our kids' DNA tested, as I had no trust for her at this point. Well, that was probably pretty smart because you were totally shocked that she cheated on you. What's to say, hey, she didn't do that before? The STD panels brought her more shame and embarrassment, while she was very saddened and depressed that I wanted to get DNA testing done. She swore the kids were mine, however, relented to the test as she realized my trust for her was less than zero at this point. For the next 2 years, now listen to this. Is this worth it? I mean, I got to ask this question. Is it worth trying to reconcile and really going through misery like he's going to talk about here? He says, for the next 2 years, we lived a miserable existence. We were living a lie, and it was toxic to our souls and our sanity. We kept up a charade with our children, extended family, and friends. My wife kept all of her clothing in our master bedroom, and every night we retired to our bedroom to give the impression we were still sharing a bed as normal. However, I would then have her sneak out to sleep in the spare bedroom as I didn't want anything to do with her. We never slept in the same bed for 2 full years. Imagine living like that. In front of our kids, family, and friends, we would talk lovingly, we would hold hands and give each other small pecks on the lips. But when we were alone, I totally ignored her and treated her coldly. I grew to hate my wife during this time. She repulsed me, but instead of giving up, she was relentless, doing everything she could to win back my love. However, I was a cold, hard stone. Now, could you imagine, again, I'm going to say this, living like that for 2 years? I mean, basically, you just lost 2 very critical years of your life there. You're in your, mid 20s and you just lived in misery. I required her to get a part-time job. Now that was pretty smart because now she's not going to have any free time. I think that's one of the things. She had too much free time, even though she was taking care of the kids, and she was able to squeeze in an affair, working while our kids were at school. Our basic routine was we would all leave the house at about the same time. After her work day, she would pick up the kids, come home, and start dinner. I would then come home around 6. We would all eat dinner and clean up, and we would spend the rest of the night with the kids talking, playing games, watching movies, doing homework, etc. On the weekends, I would take the kids to places like the Science Center, museums, amusement parks, the zoo, swimming, on hikes, and left my wife home alone. We'd leave in the morning and often didn't return home until mid to late afternoon. She desperately wanted to go with us, but I didn't want her to. So she and I lied to everyone and said this was her mommy alone time, time to give her a break from all the cooking and house chores she did during the week. So this guy, during this 2-year period, was doing everything to stay away from her. Looking back, this 2-year period was the worst time of my life. Things changed for us one Saturday. Our kids were with my wife's parents for the day, and I was in the garage putting up some shelving and bike racks on the wall. I got myself into a predicament where I needed another set of hands to mount the shelf. While I didn't want to, I went into the house and asked my wife if she could help, and she was so happy to do so, as this was the first alone thing I had asked her to do together in over 2 years. She had just taken a bath and smelled clean like shampoo and soap. I could just imagine that because that is a terrific smell. I could tell she had shaved her legs and she was wearing very short shorts and a bare midriff t-shirt. I knew she dressed this way just for me, as she dressed provocatively every time we were alone, which wasn't very often by my choice. Each time previously, though, I acted like I didn't notice, he says. To mount the unit, I had to get under the bottom shelf, which was about 3.5 feet off the ground, while she stood beside me pressing the shelf to the wall. All I could see of her was her legs up to just over her belly button, and it was definitely turning me on. Uh-oh, we know where this is going to go. I had to instruct her to move closer and closer to me in order to get the shelf in place, which made us both burst out laughing since she was nearly on top of me. He says here, I admit those last few inches were not needed. And he gives a little wink. I finally got the shelf mounted and came out from under the bottom shelf, and we were both still laughing. She said, that was fun. And I didn't say anything. I just placed my drill on the shelf slowly, then grabbed her and kissed her passionately. She smiled. She liked that. She's been waiting for that for 2 years. I then took her hand and led her up to that bedroom where we spent the entire afternoon and evening making love, talking, cuddling, and showering together. It was the best session we ever had and one of the most memorable days of my life. So I got to hand it to this woman. She was doing everything right. She hung in there with this guy, and eventually she just wore him down and broke him down. And now he's back in it 100%, as you can see, because he says this was the first day of our second marriage. And it has been 11 years of love, happiness, and bliss. Since this time, I could not have asked for anything more from a wife and a mother. Right after the affair happened, I used to think about it every waking minute, where now I will go months without it crossing my mind. See, you're never going to get that affair totally out of your mind, though you can put it in the corner recesses of your mind, but still, even like he says, he will go months without thinking about it, but still it's going to pop up every once in a while. He says we haven't discussed the affair in years, and I stopped bringing it up to her since that magical Saturday, as I feel we had put this dark time behind us. We had the perfect married life until, let's see what happens here. Oh, you got to stay tuned for part 2. And like I said, that is coming up tomorrow. Come back tomorrow and find out what happens to this OP. And I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Let me know your comments about this story. Would you have taken her back once you found out she cheated the first time? How do you think he handled this situation? Would you have lived in misery for 2 years like he did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this great channel. And I will catch you on the next one.